there's an amazing report that was written by the U.S. Department of Justice, and in this report, they mentioned the boats that were escorted out. And my dad, later on, I went through this with him, and he was telling me the names of all the guys. 60 years later, he could still tell me the names of everybody on those boats and who they were and what happened. And then later on, it actually says right in here about how the boats had to be escorted under guard by the Coast Guard and all, and that was my dad. That's what he did.
Yeah.
And many years later, when he was in the Coast Guard, Mike DiMaggio was one of the fishermen on the boats that my dad used to escort out. And once they'd got out on the Farallones, he used to get invited over to Mike's boat, and Mike would make spaghetti for him every day.
Yeah.
So they were very, very good friends. The family was good friends.
Yeah, because during the war, of course, because Frank, my husband, could speak Italian, they really did need him there to get the fishermen out on the safe ground, because it was all mined out there. And then they had to take him back too. And like she says, he would have spaghetti on their boats.
I'll show you a photo of the men who were commissioned. This is commissioning day.
Yeah, we have to scan it later.
And this is my father on his boat, and that's his commanding officer.
Do you remember anything about the interaction between the authorities at that time and banning the Italians from doing?
Absolutely, and that's what this report is about. The fishermen who were citizens were given these little cards, like a green card. If you had your green card, they would allow you to go out to your boat. My father and his cousin Mario Alioto stood at the gates and checked every person's green card to let them in, and he said it was the worst thing of his life. He'd have the men, these were his uncles, his cousins, his friends, would be standing there. They'd be crying, they'd be begging him to let them out to fish because they couldn't feed their families if they didn't. And he wasn't allowed to let them out on their boat if they didn't have their card. And most of these people couldn't read or write. How are they going to get their citizenship? And they'd been here for 25 and 30 years. And all of a sudden, he was the one who had to tell them no, and he knew them all. He was related to most of them. That was one of the worst things of his life.
How long did that period last?
For the whole war. And the reason, it's not that they were worried about the safety of the boats. It's because they feared the Italians would collaborate with the Japanese once outside the Golden Gate. So he was actually, it's like the fox in the hen house. He was hired to watch the fishermen, but he was one of them. I mean, Washington obviously didn't know that, but that's why they were under guard from the Coast Guard, not because... Not to protect them. Heavens no, they could care less about that. They also confiscated most of the boats. My grandfather had his boat confiscated. The MPs came to their house on Carolina Street and took away their shortwave radio and destroyed it. They never got it back. He wasn't allowed to work. And so he went to Neighborhood House in Potrero Hill, and he got his citizenship. I have his papers here and his photos and all that. He got his citizenship. They still wouldn't let him on the boat. And I'm telling you this because I think this story was common to everybody. They still wouldn't let him on because my grandmother was still an enemy alien. She couldn't get her citizenship because she couldn't read or write. She just couldn't do it. And she had 8 kids to take care of. So they still wouldn't let him go because she was still an Italian citizen. Now after the war, the government offered my grandfather his boat back, and of course by that time it was trashed. They had been using it as a minesweeper for 3 years, and it was a complete wreck. They offered it back if he bought it back. They had this huge price that they wanted him to pay to get the boat back. This is a man who's been out of work for 3 years, and now they want the top of the line insult is to ask him to pay to get the boat back. He didn't have the money, but his partner, Tom Lazio, had enough money. So Tom bought the boat himself, and he moved it up to Humboldt. And the Lazio family still operates Alioto Lazio down on Jefferson Street. And the 3 women who run this crabbing operation down there, they're still running the business. You know, there were a lot of Italian prisoners who were kept over there on Treasure Island or across the bay or somewhere over there, maybe across the bay, and they would have these Sunday dinners where they asked Italians in San Francisco to host an Italian prisoner for dinner. And a lot of the Aliotos in North Beach did that. That was a big thing back then, you know, have an Italian prisoner boy come home for dinner.
Yeah.
And my grandmother here would say, "Are you crazy? You know, the country has already done all these other things to my family. You've taken my son Petey and sent him off to war, and you've taken my husband's boat away. You've done all this stuff. Now you want us to invite the prisoners, and you know those Italians are shooting at us, and you want us to have the prisoners over for dinner? Are you crazy?"